Respiration. How are lungs the same for animals? We have the nasal and sinus cavities, the larynx, trachea, the lungs. And the diaphragm tightens to pull in air, relaxes to exhale. What characteristics do the respiratory structures of all animals share? Respiratory structures provide a large surface area of moist, selectively permeable membrane. Respiratory structures maintain a difference in the relative concentrations of oxygen and carbon dioxide on either side of the respiratory membrane, promoting diffusion. Living cells can not actively pump oxygen or carbon dioxide across membranes, yet, in order to breathe, all animals must exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide with their surroundings. Animals have respiratory structures that promote the movement of these gases in the required directions by passive diffusion. Substances diffuse from an area of higher concentration to an area of lower concentration. Gases diffuse most efficiently across a thin, moist membrane that is permeable to these gases. The larger the surface area of the membrane, the more diffusion can take place. Respiratory structures provide a large surface area of moist, selectively permeable membrane. Respiratory structures maintain a difference in the relative concentrations of oxygen and carbon dioxide on either side of the respiratory membrane, promoting diffusion. Because respiration surfaces are moist, the water molecules in all animals' breath condense into fog when the air outside is very cold. How do aquatic animals breathe? Many aquatic invertebrates and most aquatic chordates, other than reptiles and mammals, exchange gases through their gills. Aquatic reptiles and aquatic mammals, such as whales, breathe with lungs and must hold their breath underwater. Some aquatic invertebrates, such as cnidarians and some flatworms, are relatively small and have thin-walled bodies whose outer surface are always wet. These animals rely on diffusion of oxygen and carbon dioxide through their outer body covering. A few aquatic chordates, including lancelets, some amphibians, and even some sea snakes, rely on gas exchange by diffusion across body surfaces. Many aquatic invertebrates and most aquatic chordates exchange gases through gills. Gills are feathery structures that expose a large surface area of thin, selectively permeable membrane to water. Inside gill membranes is a network of tiny, thin-walled blood vessels called capillaries. In the gill filaments, water is pumped past thousands of thread-like gill filaments, which are rich with capillaries. Filaments absorb oxygen from the water and release carbon dioxide. In the mouth, the muscular pump pulls water in through the mouth and pushes it back across the gills. Operculum, water carrying carbon dioxide is pumped out behind the operculum or gill cover. Aquatic reptiles and aquatic mammals, such as whales, breathe with lungs and must hold their breath underwater. Lungs are organs that exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide between blood and air. What respiratory structures enable land animals to breathe? Respiratory structures in terrestrial invertebrates include skin, mantle cavities, book lungs, and tracheal tubes. But all terrestrial vertebrates, reptiles, birds, mammals, and land stages of most amphibians breathe with lungs, and Gimli breathes with lungs also. Terrestrial invertebrates have a wide variety of respiratory structures. Some land invertebrates, such as the earthworm, that live in moist environments, can respire across their skin as long as it stays moist. In other invertebrates, such as this land snail, respiration is accomplished by the mantle cavity, which is lined with moist tissue and blood vessels. Spiders respire using organs called book lungs, which are made of parallel sheet-like layers of thin tissues containing blood vessels. On the spider body, there are book lungs underneath. Airflow goes past them and exchanges oxygen for carbon dioxide. Most insects respire using a system of tracheal tubes that extends throughout the body. Air enters and leaves the system through the openings in the body surface called spiracles. These are all spiracles, and these are tracheal tubes that help that oxygen transport to exchange for carbon dioxide. Although lung structure in terrestrial vertebrates varies, the process of inhaling and exhaling are similar. The nostril, mouth, and throat up in the top, and the trachea as it goes down, and then the lung. An amphibian, not very big. Reptile, larger, and then mammal, larger still. Inhaling brings oxygen-rich air through the trachea or airway into the lungs. Inside the lungs, oxygen diffuses into the blood through lung capillaries. At the same time, carbon dioxide diffuses out the capillaries into the lungs. Oxygen-poor air is then exhaled. The internal surface area of lungs increases from amphibians to reptiles to mammals, larger surface area for each of the more complex organisms. A typical amphibian lung is little more than a sac with ridges. The reptilian lung is divided into chambers that increase the surface area for gas exchange. Mammalian lungs branch extensively and are filled with bubble-like structures called alveoli. Alveoli provide an enormous surface area for gas exchange and enable mammals to take in the large amount of oxygen required by their high metabolic rate. In birds, the lungs are structured so that the air flows mostly in one direction, so no stale air gets trapped in the system. Gas exchange surfaces are continuously in contact with fresh air. By this higher efficiency gas exchange, birds obtain the oxygen needed to power flight muscles at high altitudes for longer time. So the air comes in, the trachea. There's a posterior air sac that fills, partially filling lungs. That's the first step. That's inhalation. Air sacs fill. And exhalation, the air sac empties. So this empties, fills the lungs, pushes what was in the lungs out. And these are air tubes in the lungs. Instead of alveoli bulb sacs, these are air tubes. The air passes through.